You're live. So, guys, welcome. Welcome to another week. And I've been looking at this property, the property news that comes up every week. And they're talking about tax breaks. They're talking about the housing crisis and everything like that. So that's what we're going to be discussing tonight. If you guys have got any questions, as always, happy to entertain them. But we're going to be looking at the possibility of Section 23 tax reliefs coming back into the country. Those of you who are not familiar what Section 23 is, back in I think it was in the 90s it was introduced. I can remember the whole of the Temple Bar area in Dublin was built off of the back of Section 23 tax relief. And so wouldn't mind getting your views on this. It is a real political hot potato, that's for sure. If you were to reintroduce something like this, you can imagine it's like the government putting a target on their back, because everyone is going to just be suggesting that they're doing this for the developers and for the builders' benefits. And of course, Fianna Fáil was always sort of suggested that they were in the pocket of the big developers, and the developers would always be going to the Galway races and all that. That was the kind of narrative that was always pushed out there. And so you can see why it would be very sort of unpopular amongst the developers, or not amongst the politicians, to introduce that, even if it was of massive benefit to the housing crisis. I mean, what we need to do is build as many houses as possible, and we're just not anywhere near the races that we need to be. If you consider, in the Irish economy now at the moment, housing is just the only show in town. It's what everyone is talking about. It's a major problem. And I think Davy Stockbrokers came out during the week and they said that there is a shortage of housing in or around 212,000 units. 212,000 units. And we built, it looks like we're heading for about 34,000 units constructed this year. But in 2019, which isn't such a long time ago, only 5 years ago, in 2019, we had 21,000 was the number of units that were built. And then COVID came along, and obviously there was a lot of slowdowns and things like that during that period. So 34,000, it's great that we're at that level now, but we're nowhere near where we need to be. We have 200,000 houses that we need to build. And of the 200,000 houses that are required, you can imagine, like at 34,000 at the current rate, you're talking about 7 years just to meet the current demand. And that's not assuming any additional demand being lumped on top of that over the next 7 years. So very difficult, very, very difficult. And so I can understand why it was actually the Institute of Professional Auctioneers and Valuers, the IPAV, that came out with the suggestion that we consider some sort of tax break to incentivize house building and apartment building and things like that. So curious what you guys think. I definitely think it is a good idea, but I can see how it's so politically difficult that the likelihood is that it would cause ructions inside of the political parties and stuff. So probably not going to happen, but definitely we need to come out and have something like that. Wacko asks, "How are you, Gavin?" I'm doing good. I'm not sure if you guys can hear in the background, but it's bedtime for the kids, and so they're creating havoc downstairs. And so I wouldn't be surprised if we get a little hello from them at some stage. So be prepared. But things are good. I'm going to, as always, I'm open up to questions. It says here, so this is from Lisa. Why can't the councils hire construction workers directly to build houses instead of paying developers? It's a good question. The thing is that the first of all, the process of building houses is quite specialized. You would think that it's, you just hire the construction workers and you start building. But actually, the developers that are doing it, there's a whole process there that has been learnt over a number of years. And I know because we build houses, and so I can tell you what's involved is there's a lot of coordination. And in order to actually achieve what you're talking about, you would have to go and put all of that into place. Now, it could be done, there's no doubt. But what you would have is you would have to go out on a hiring spree and hire a lot of people that are currently employed in the private sector. So you'd have to hire project managers, and you'd have to hire all of these guys and bring them in-house so that they are working inside of a county council. And county councils, when you go, I mean, look, I wouldn't even consider myself an expert in this area, so I don't know how much of this is the case. But from my understanding, hiring into a county council, that would mean that guys are entitled to pensions and all of that kind of stuff. And so there would be this whole knock-on impact. And you can imagine that in order to appoint these people, they'd have to go and they'd have to advertise in journals. And I can just imagine it's a nightmare. Like, they did have it back, back in the 90s and stuff. The councils were building lots and lots of houses. But one of the problems is that they weren't that efficient at it. And I can remember when the councils have hired big developers to come in, or not the developers, but the big building and construction firms to come in and work for them, almost always they had rings run around them by the professional builders, and they'd end up paying a fortune in extras. I know that there's a big, I think it's a Dutch company called BAM, BAM, and they have a reputation for bidding for the job, getting the job, and then after the job is finished, they go and they submit all these claims for extra work that was done or stuff that wasn't originally in the bid. And I know that I've heard of projects where the original contract sum might have been 10 million, but after that they get an extra 7 million in extras and things like that. And the problem is because of the because of the competition rules that the EU has around state sponsoring and state support of businesses and stuff like that, it has to be done by the book, and it has to be done through all these official channels. And so there are only a handful of companies that can do some of these big projects. And usually there's only 2 companies that can actually qualify for that job. One is CISC and the other is BAM. And so you have CISC and BAM going for projects together. And so it doesn't give the government a whole lot of choice, or the local councils a whole lot of choice. And so naturally enough, somebody ends up overpaying. Now, definitely the way probably to go about it, and I had this discussion yesterday, or this morning, in fact, my podcast went out with the lady who runs Mortgage Navigators, and we were talking about mortgages, and we were talking about like how to go about getting yourself mortgage ready if you're trying to buy a property and all that. And Mags Barrett is her name, and her take on it was very similar to what you're suggesting, and that is that there's the developers are building houses, and the houses then are, even though we're building 34,000 houses, those 34,000 houses that are being built are being paid for by a combination of different buyers. You got first-time buyers in the market trying to buy; they're supported by tax breaks and things like that. You've got people who are moving around, who are trying to kind of downsize and stuff. They're trying to move around. And then you've got the local councils buying social and affordable property from the developers so that they can be added to the housing list and stuff. But it's all coming out of the same pool of demand, and so or of supply, I should say. And so makes it kind of difficult. So there's only so much being built, and it has to be divided up amongst all those different parties that are looking for it. Whereas if the local council were just building for themselves, at least that would mean that the developers are just delivering for people who are purchasing or renting or whatever. At the moment, when we as developers, when we're building something, the way it works is that we have to give up to 20% of the properties that we build. We have to give them to the local authority. Now, we don't give it to them for free. The way it works is that they pay us the cost of them with a small amount of profit allowed. But you don't get any value for the price of the site that they're built on prior to the granting of planning permission. That's how, as far as I can remember, that's the structure of it. And so it means that if you buy a site for 100 grand and it has no planning, and then you go and get planning for 20 houses on it, the 20 houses, when you get that planning, suddenly that value of that site might jump from 100 grand to 300 grand or something like that. So you've got this big jump in value, and that is all because of the planning permission. And then you have to give 20% of your housing units away. So if you're building 20 units, that means that you've got to take 4 of them and you've got to sell them to the local authority. But you don't sell them at the price, including the 300,000 value. You sell them at the original 100,000. I have a feeling my kids might drop in. 1 second, I'm going to close the door. Now, I was about to be trying to burst down the door now. So, my guys, I'm going to go and continue to read on what some of the messages are here. So, do you? The next one is encourage your view. Okay, sorry, that's not for you guys. Okay, do you know anyone with HMO agencies in Ireland? So, HMO, not a lot of people. I'm being told I'm stupid by my son. Not a lot of people are doing HMO agency. Okay, so HMO is house of multiple occupancy. That's where you take a house and you divide it into multiple units. And so let's just use the example of a 5-bedroom house. Instead of renting that to a family, you might decide that you want to instead rent that out as 5 bedrooms, and you'll go and you'll have somebody like a number of professional guys, or we'll say maybe laborers or something like that, are working on a site nearby. They'll come in and you'll be able to get rent from 5 separate people paying for just the room that they occupy. And what a lot of the time, what we'll also do is instead of it having a living room downstairs, we'll turn that into a room as well. So you'd end up with 6 bedrooms rented out. And sometimes you might extend out the rear, or you might, if you have a big attic space, maybe you go up into the attic and you can end up with 7 or 8 bedrooms. And each of them is collecting rent, but you're only collecting rent on the bedroom. And so from the person who's renting it, he or she has the benefit of only paying $600-700 a month, instead of having to chip in to, say, a $3,000 a month property. In which case, if somebody moves out, then you're thinking, oh, wait, that means now that we have to chip in for that person's share and stuff. You have none of that with HMO. So one of the benefits of it is that everyone's just responsible for their own space. That is attractive to people. Like, you don't want to go and sign up to a place and say, you know, the way we'd say if you're renting with students or something like that and you're doing some sort of a house share, you could end up with 5 people sharing a 3,000 a month rent or something like that. And then you've got to go and you've got to pay for the electricity. Who's going to put their name on the bill? Then you got to pay for the gas. You got to pay for the, whatever it is, the phone. If you've got internet, like a lot of people will obviously want internet on the phone and stuff like that, or in the house for using their computer and stuff. Who's going to be the name on the bill for that? What you do as a landlord doing HMO is you rent out the rooms individually and you provide all of those services. And so it's very, very handy for somebody just to move straight in and then start renting. And so it's a benefit for both parties. The benefit for the landlord is that they get more rent. They get more rent because they're getting it individually from multiple people. And so those people will usually pay more than you'd get for just that house on its own. That's one of the great things about it. The problem is that there's more work to it for sure, because you're not managing, like, you're not collecting rent from one family. You're collecting rent from 7 individuals, we'll say. And those 7 individuals, they're using the house, like they're 7 individuals cooking, 7 individuals washing their clothes and doing things like that. So you can imagine how the wear and tear on the house can be higher. A 5-bedroom house might be rented by a husband, a wife, and maybe 3 kids or something like that. And so, 5 people are using the house, but it's not as intensive because there's only one person cooking for that family. Whereas if you've got 7 people and they're all individuals, that's 7 people cooking meals and things like that. Nowadays, a lot of people get their meals provided for in the office, we'll say. If you're an office worker working for Google or something like that, a lot of the time people can have breakfast, lunch, and dinner at the office. And then when they go home, they don't need to eat. So I suppose there's that aspect of it, William says, great insights, Gavin. Well, thank you, William. Very nice of you to say. Let me keep on going with some more questions. Let me see. What about PJH? I don't know what that is. BAM are very cute but the government doesn't have a clue what it's doing. Yeah, so BAM are the contractor firm that I mentioned, and they literally run rings around everyone because they have the way it works, and this happens a lot with people that are hiring a builder, and it's obviously if you're renovating a house and you've never done it before, then it's easy for you to go and make a lot of mistakes. And so what we'd say is use this as an example. You go and you ask an architect to design a nice extension, and you're going to extend out your to the rear garden, maybe create like a nice extra big kitchen or something. Maybe there's an extra living room, maybe an extra bedroom, whatever. The architect will draw that on a set of drawings, and then what is often they'll go for planning permission. They get the planning permission, and then the client will turn around and say, "Okay, let's go and start building that now." And they'll go out and they'll ask the architect to will you go and speak to a couple of builders? The builders will submit a price, and the price will be based on the drawings that they're given. But a lot of the time, the drawings that are given to price are really just planning permission drawings. They're very basic. They just have the rooms shown in basic outline. They won't have like that wall is concrete block, that the skirting boards are a certain type of skirting boards. The doors are solid timber doors. The light fittings, there's going to be, a rose in the room, or is there going to be 6 downlighters? The plug sockets, are they going to be the plastic plug sockets, or are they going to go for the stainless steel ones? Like all those little details, builders, when they're quoting for a job, they will just take the standard as the price. And then when you get into the construction, that's when the builder is saying, okay, would you like the plastic or would you like the stainless steel? And all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, well, of course I want the stainless steel. And said, okay, that's an extra. And then as you go through a job, like it takes maybe a year and a half or something like that for a job to start all the way to finish. In that space of time, it's all those little decisions that you make that are different to what was originally bid on. They're where the extras get sort of built up. And so I've seen it over the years where like you started out maybe with a 150,000 project, and then by the time you're finished, it's like 230,000 or something like that. It can easily go over. And it's because, there's various little things that you want to make the house special, and you're not prepared to compromise on those. But of course, when you go for that, it all mounts up and it adds up and adds up. It's like buying a car, oh, I'd like to have the leather seats. Oh, I'd also like to have those nice rims that are 22-inch versus the 20-inch or whatever. And next minute, thousands are added on. It's the same thing with a house, with building a house. So magnify that by a couple of million. And that's what the likes of BAM and these guys are doing. They do this big contract. They submit the price. They say it's going to cost 10 million to build these, so many apartments. And then when it comes to building it, suddenly it's like, oh, well, we didn't think you were going to put an elevator into that. Now we'll have to add that in, and next minute, all of this stuff. And you can see that is exactly what's happening in the Children's Hospital. In that the National Children's Hospital is under construction. I think it's already something like 2 billion projects. It's like a billion over budget. And it's because of those little incremental increases that kind of keep on getting loaded on. And what they do is they have an original project team that said, like, here we go, this is going to be the best in class hospital. And then when it starts getting built, they start bringing in other doctors and various people, and this is how it's going to be run. And you go, but we can't do it like that. It has to have such and such a thing. And then sure enough, that has to get built into the budget and gets changed. And so that's how it happens incrementally. And it's often, it can't be avoided. because the decisions you're making at the start of the project, you don't necessarily know what they should be at the end. But if you were to do it a couple of times, for sure you would learn as you go, and you'd start to understand that, next time I'm asked that question, I'll make sure I do it this way or I do it that way. And so you would build up a kind of a knowledge base, and you would hope that that knowledge base over time would improve, and you'd get to the point where you're not getting hit for so many extras. Question from Lisa again. I definitely agree it would be a big job initially, but with the amount of houses, it'd be worth it. Yeah, I think so. Lisa, I think you're absolutely right. I do not disagree. The LDA have been hiring significantly from the private side to deliver on the government side. Yeah, local development authority, or the it's funny you say that, actually, because just down the road from where I live, the LDA are building, I think it's something like 360 units. So it's a big project, and they're doing that. So it is possible, and hopefully there will be more of that stuff done. Put your mortgage down payment into a high yield compounding index instead. Leave for 35 years. That's true, but a lot of people, they want to have their house paid for before they start worrying about stock markets, things like that. I'll tell you what. One of the interesting things I've found over the years is that stock market, like if you want to get financially wealthy, and if you want to build a robust, financial strength that will sustain itself over the long term, then don't put all your eggs in one basket, as they say. So if you buy property and you only thing you own is property, you might do really, really well for a period of time, but then there's always like cyclical. Property is like all these things; it's cyclical, and there will be a downturn, and then you will be in that downturn, and all of your property that you have will go down in value. And the problem is that a lot of the time when you're borrowing money for property, it's based on a certain level. And if you go below that level, then the bank are going to force you to sell the property, or you're going to have to put more money in and stuff. And so that's what happened in 2008. A lot of people were highly leveraged, myself included. And you go out and you think you're doing really, really well. You're borrowing money, the property's going up in value. You borrow again for another property, it goes up, and you build up I built up a huge portfolio, and then suddenly property prices fell. And I remember thinking to myself, okay, I'll just have to weather this storm. And you think the storm is going to last a short period of time, but it turns out to be like a 6-year recession. That was just too long. And so even though you were like good according to the banks initially, suddenly over a period of time, people changed their tune, and next minute that you're being forced to sell properties at a reduced price. And I sold stuff that I like. This is actually painful to talk about. I bought a property for 2 million, and I was forced to sell it at the bottom of the market, and I sold it for 685,000. So over 1.3 million loss. And I had borrowed a lot of money on that property. So I owed that loss. That 1.3 million was effectively all bank debt that I had to pay. Even though the property was now gone, I had to find that 1.3 to pay them back. Let me see, Chris. Gavin, you're some man and a wealth of knowledge. I've recently come across your channel podcast. I'm addicted to working my way through the episodes. Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it. Okay, guys, I'm going to keep on going with by the way, so I have Instagram here, I have TikTok here, and I have my YouTube channel on. Any of you guys who want to watch this, if you're only catching part of it, go into the YouTube channel and you'll find it there. And I have noticed that quite a few people are actually watching the YouTube replay and stuff. So, but one of the things I will say is that TikTok, you guys are great at leaving comments. Like there are so many comments on TikTok and very few on the others. Having said that, Chris left a message and a few other people in here. So let's go back. Put your mortgage payment down. Yes, we've just done that one. Let me go. I'm moving home. What to change my existing house to? I want to change my existing house to HMO in a couple of years. Do you provide advice? Yes. Well, I have a couple of different options. I have a mastermind. In fact, every Wednesday I do my mastermind call at 6. So I only just finished that a little while ago. And in that mastermind, we have a network of about 45 people, and we just chat about this kind of stuff. But I'm speaking to the actual individuals. It's a big Zoom call, and we're all in there sharing our different views and stuff rather than reading comments. I also have an actual program, like a course that teaches a lot of different things, teaches how to raise money from investors, all that kind of stuff. So anyone who's interested, reach out to me and I'll be happy to give you some details and stuff like that. But HMO, it's not difficult, but it can be a bit more hands-on than your average investment. Like most people will do a traditional buy-to-let where they buy a property and then they put it on the market to rent, and it'll be traditional lease to a tenant. And then you go through the RTB, which is the Residential Tenancies Board. And those are the guys that have the controls and the rent control zone and all that stuff. That can be quite a handful. First of all, there's a lot of complications. There's a lot of delays in getting, if you run into problems with the RTB, God help you, because it can be 18 months until they get resolved and stuff. So there's a lot of complaints. Like the RTB was set up for the right reasons, but the problem is that they're just overwhelmed with the amount of properties on the market, and the amount of, I guess, their resources are pretty limited. So they struggle to cope. And so people stop paying rent. And it's, okay, well, we're going to have to take a case then to the RTB, and the RTB take like 12, 18 months to respond. And you're there like not collecting rent for all that period of time. And then, of course, the tenant can't afford to pay you a year's rent that you've missed. So everyone is a loser in this. With a HMO, one of the ways that they're done is using a license. So it's more akin to a bed and breakfast. And so you're actually, people are paying a license fee, and they don't have like a fixed tenancy agreement. And so there's various benefits to that. Now, the other thing is that there can be VAT after you achieve a certain level of income. You have to register for VAT and things like that. So there's a few complications, but it's definitely a way to earn more money than you would be through a traditional. There is a letting and management company based in Glasnevin who are classed at HMO letting and management. Yeah, there are a couple of specialists out there, but there's not that many. Archon Lettings on Botanic Road. That's from Sean. Well, thank you, Sean, for sharing that. From Wacko, what's the viability of acting as a contractor and manager specifically for HMOs as a beginner? What's the viability of acting as a contractor and a manager? Like, HMO is not complicated. Like, some of my clients are doing HMOs, and these are guys that have like no formal education. Like they would have left school at 14. They went straight into the trades, and they figured it out as they went. So from that point of view, I don't think, don't overthink it. But you do have to be sort of somebody who can see opportunity, who can who can kind of like design a house as you're looking at it. And so one of the guys in the group, very, very good at this kind of stuff. I'm not going to share his name because he's a very private guy, but he's done multiple HMOs over the last couple of years. It's a beautiful job. Like when you see these photographs, you're like, wow, that looks like a really nice place to live. HMOs sometimes get this kind of negative connotation of being kind of like cheap and nasty. Not at all. This is like staying in a really fancy bed and breakfast or something like that, and all en suite. And so, everyone has got a nice ensuite room. He puts in a television screen on the wall and all that kind of stuff. And people just come and go. He'll put in 2 fridge freezers. He'll put in 2 washing machines. He'll put in 2 cooking hobs, so that if you've got 6 or 8 people living in a house, the demand for that stuff is pretty high. And so that can drive people mad. If they want to go down and cook a meal and somebody else is standing at the cooker, then you're not able to do it. But if you have a second cooker there, then you can go ahead. And so that just reduces the kind of frustration level that the guys are experiencing. Another big problem with HMOs is parking. If you're in an area, let's say you buy in a cul-de-sac and you buy a house in a cul-de-sac, like normally a house will have 1, maybe 2 car parking spaces. But if you're renting it to sort of 6 people, you got to make sure that you're renting it to people who don't need a car, because if you suddenly introduce 6 cars into what is a small cul-de-sac, you're just going to have all the neighbors around you frustrated that they can't, that their children can't visit them any longer, and all that kind of stuff. So various things you just need to be kind of wise to, so that you don't alienate your neighbors, because as soon as you start getting objections to planning applications and all that kind of stuff, it's a bit of a nightmare. And I've built projects where I wasn't aware of the difficulty of getting planning permission before I bought the property. And then I got rejected 3 times. And it was every time it was from like a local residents association that were basically against what we were trying to do. And so first one, like, it's not cheap to lodge a planning application for, like, we'll say kind of a small development or something like that. You might spend 30 or 40,000 doing it. And to get turned down 2 or 3 times, you can imagine the frustration, first of all, at the time, but also the cost of doing that 3 times. Do you think we'll ever see a major reform of the RTB? It's not fit for purpose. Yes, I think I don't think there's going to be a major reform, because I think, like, you would like to think that they know that there's this problem and maybe they can reform themselves, but I just don't think they have the resources. And I think they're like the deer in the headlights. It's like they're just full speed trying to stay up with the amount of stuff going on in the market. Very difficult to do that, From Sandra, I think it is. I have a property with a mortgage where I live in, and I'm considering to go for a buy-to-let as an investment for retirement. Is it worth it, or is it too risky? Sandra, what I would suggest is, if you're thinking about doing that, is do the sums. Like, it's not as simple as just, should I turn it into a buy-to-let? What you should do is, like, the first thing that I would do is, I mean, definitely it's worth looking at. I wouldn't rule it out. But what I would look at is, if you've got a mortgage, consider what your mortgage is. Okay, so let's say you're paying 1,000 a month or something like that in a mortgage. Then you got to say, okay, that's my fixed cost. Now you got to think about, if I was to rent the property, what would I achieve in rent? And if you could get, say, 2,000 a month from the property, then you'd be saying to yourself, okay, so I'm paying 1,000 out in expenses and I'm bringing the 2,000 in income. So there's 1,000 profit. Now, that's not bad, but don't forget, you'll have to pay tax. If you're working for a living, then this all factors into your tax rate. And so the likelihood is you only get to keep about half of that. If anything happens and the tenant were to stop paying, what would that result in? That could result in you not being able to meet the payment on the mortgage. Potentially the bank then, try to go after you. Now, they don't go after you immediately. If you miss a payment, the bank don't just say, right, that's it, you've lost your house. They'll give you an opportunity to pay, to pay up and stuff like that, and to catch up on payments. But it can, after a couple of months, they start initiating procedures. Now, I have a property in Spain, and I didn't pay the mortgage for a period of time, like, because tenant had moved out and I'd been collecting rent, and then he left it in a state that wasn't really great. I mean, it wasn't damaged or anything like that, but it wasn't ready for somebody else to move into. So I was trying to rent it. I couldn't rent it because I had to spend money on it to get it rented. And I can remember just missing a payment for the mortgage, and then another month went by and I didn't get it rented, and then another went by, and I just remember kind of starting to get worried about, what are the bank going to do here? And in the end, what I had to do is I had to spend probably around 7,000 on doing up the property, renovating, well, not renovating, but just redecorating the place. And that 7,000 had to come out of some other resources that I had. And then after that, I got it rented. And then as soon as I got it rented, I started going about trying to repay. But I was maybe 6 months not paying the mortgage, and they had started to get kind of difficult with me. And so you do have a period of time, but it's like you have to repay them. In the end, what they gave me an opportunity to repay the mortgage and to bring it up to date, or to pay the entire mortgage off. And so it was either sell the property or catch up on the payments. And I was given that option, and I managed to get the money from elsewhere, and I just paid it. From Beautiful Redesign. Hi, Gavin. When is it going to be decided that first-time buyer scheme being extended? And how long do you think I could be extended for? I saw in the paper the other day, they were talking about that that Dara O'Brien is trying to extend it at least to the end of 2026. Now, but that is not, it's like, it'll be the budget. It will be when that is decided. And so you're going to have to wait until October, whenever the budget comes out. And I'd say that's when it'll be announced. But I do think it's unlikely that they'll pull that. I think that they'll probably extend it. The only thing is that's going against it is that it's widely acknowledged that that is the reason that first-time buying houses, new build houses, have been pushed up in price, because there's so many first-time buyers out there, and the first-time buyers can't afford the deposit, and so the first-time buyers scheme is kind of getting them over that hurdle, and that is one of the issues. Let me see another question here. Can I apply for a mortgage if I'm not Irish? Yes, you can, but it depends. When I say I'm not Irish, do you have a residency here in Ireland? That was one of the questions. You listen to my podcast, okay? So guys, anyone who's not familiar, I have a podcast called Behind the Facade, and it's all about property investing and stuff like that. This morning, I posted the latest episode. I've done 217 episodes now, believe it or not. So 217 weeks in a row, I've been posting this podcast. So it's about 4 years. And this morning's one was with a lady called Mags Barrett, who's the head of Mortgage Navigators. And she does a lot of mortgages for people who are not Irish. And she was explaining that if you, like say you're working on a contract for multinational or something like that, that can be difficult. Sometimes people who are on contract who don't have a salary, they don't have like full-time employment, they have a contract. And there's various things that you have to do. But one of the questions is, what kind of work permit do you have? And there's different types. I can't remember exactly how she termed it, but like there's a 1 and there's a 4. And depending on what level you're at, the banks, the way it is, the lenders that are looking to lend on a mortgage, the worry they have with lending to somebody who's not Irish is that if you lose your job, that you'll just be on the next plane home to your home country and you'll just leave the property behind. And if you leave the property behind, then they're stuck with having to go and sell it and all that. And so they are a little bit nervous about people who are not, born and bred here, who don't have like permanent fixed, roots and things like that. The likelihood is an Irish person's not going to do a runner, but somebody who's not from here, who's only had a job for a while, if they had the option of, having difficulty making payments and stuff, they might just fly out of the country and leave and just, here's the keys, good luck. And so that's one of the, I suppose, the downsides. What do you think of revenue? In what sense? Restricting construction companies with red tape. Would it be better in a housing crisis to get rid of the red tape? Yeah, well, of course, there's too much red tape, full stop. Look at the planning system, like just trying to get planning. And not just that, like this, the way it works with the system alone. Like if you're making an application for planning permission, you have to do it all in paper. Like there's a few exceptions where you can do it by online, but most of the time you have to print off all these drawings and you have to go to the local authority and you have to hand it over a desk and you have to give a payment with your credit card, and then they give you a receipt, and now you've lodged your planning. Like why that can't be done but a click of a button, where you have your drawings on a PDF and it just all gets submitted in one sort of online platform. Like, I just don't understand how that's not possible in this day and age. You can get your, the car tax for your car, you can apply online. You get that within a few hours now and stuff. And so how the planning system is being held up by these applications. If you're submitting for planning permission, if you're submitting a planning for a protected structure, you have to make 10 copies of every single drawing, and they all have to be submitted. So you end up with a package like this thick being submitted at the desk of the local authority. Can you imagine if that was just a button there? Now it's submitted. And the guys that need the 10 drawings, they could go and split that up, inside the local authority. Why should you have to do it and submit it and bring it in this big block? It's kind of ridiculous. It's the same with the legal system. You have to do all these documents, and they all, like, have you ever seen, like, if you're buying an old property? I bought a house that was built in 1748, I think it was. And so the title deeds were like a package this much, because it's every document that has existed since that property was built. So in the space of like 200 years, that property has got all of these pieces by all these different owners and stuff. All of that has to be there. And so whereas all of that was digitized, you imagine how much easier it would be. So the system is just, there's just so much crap holding us back and making it difficult, you know. Let me keep on going. First time catching your live. Great information. Thank you. By the way, guys, as I mentioned earlier, if you're catching this and you're only halfway in and you're only catching whatever, I do have this recorded fully on YouTube. So my YouTube channel is Gavin J. Gallagher, and just go in there and click on the lives, and you'll see all the I've done this like 5 or 6 times now in the last couple of weeks, and so every one of them is there, so you can just watch the whole lot. Did you budget for eyebrow waxing? So I guess that's a comment on my current grooming. So I'll move on. Let me see. Thoughts on, let me just see. God, there's a lot of comments here. Let me just find out. It's, where's the cheapest place to buy a property in Ireland? Currently, the cheapest place is in, I think it's Longford. The county of Longford, I think the average price is 169,000 compared to Dublin, where the average price is 434,000. So it's about 1/4 of the price there. Well, we'll say 1/3 to buy in Longford. Now, I remember looking at this. If you are looking at actual property, we'll say air codes. So the postal code system that we have in Ireland is the air code. If you're looking for the best place to buy, the best air code to buy is F45. Starts with F45, and that is, I think it's the Castlereagh area, and I think the average price in that air code is 139,000. Whereas if you go to Dublin 6 D06 air code, that is, I think it's 740,000 is the average price in D6. So it gives you an idea of the massive difference in where to buy property and stuff like that throughout the country. And going back to the comment about somebody thinking about moving into a house or whatever, or renting their house out, is if you simply look at the property and you sort of say, take the value of the property that you paid for it and divide the rent that you can get per year by that value. That'll give you the yield, the gross yield of your property. And some people, if you buy in, say, the Dublin area, that can be quite a low yield, like, because the prices of properties in Dublin are quite high. So it is something like maybe 5 or 6% would be the kind of traditional yield that you'll get, or we'll say the typical yield. If you go into the country, I have friends and clients and stuff like that that are getting 15, 19, 20% yield. And so what that means is, like, they're getting, relative to what they spent, they're getting at least double the return or triple the return that somebody in Dublin would be getting. So it's worth looking at that, because when you're borrowing money on a property, you're borrowing at it. The current borrowing rates are probably, Paolo, good to see you here. The borrowing rates are in the region of, we'll say, well, I think the lowest rate is currently 3.45% or something, but that's what the margin on top of that, it's probably 4 or 5% or whatever. But you're looking at, if you're earning 15%, well, then there's plenty of fat there for you to kind of like survive. But if you're earning 6% and your mortgage is costing you 5.5 or 6%, then you can see that you're almost level. And so there's no scope there for extras, for repairs, all of that kind of stuff. And sometimes you have to do repairs on property. Like, as a landlord in the traditional RTB registered lease, you will go in and you will find that the lease, the landlord is responsible for everything. So if you ring up as a tenant, you ring up your landlord, said the washing machine's broken, you as the landlord, it's your responsibility to go in and fix it or replace that. You just have to fix it or replace it. Toilet's broken, you got to send in a plumber, get that fixed. And that is one of the I suppose the downsides of being a landlord in residential. In commercial, it's a different situation. Like the stuff that I do in my commercial portfolio is just head and shoulders different. Like you basically rent to a landlord, and the landlord is, or rent to a tenant, should I say, and the tenant is fully responsible. We have a thing called an FRI lease, and an FRI lease is full repair and insure. They're responsible for the repair and the insuring of the property, and so you just have to collect 4 checks a year from the tenant, and that's it. Residential can be a lot more, but then residential, we have such a housing crisis that you're kind of guaranteed to have, find tenants. Whereas if you're in the, I don't know. Anyway, let me carry on. Sorry, I don't have a lot of knowledge on this. We're looking at a lot of different questions here from different people. Okay, going on to, do you think the Irish government should build more social housing directly? I do, but how they go about that is a good question, rather than outsourcing it to private developers. Yeah, look, they used to do that all the time. The problem is, and like all of these things, over the years, what you've found is that it becomes a very kind of overweight. Like local authorities are not known for their efficiency. Look at the fact that the planning system, that you have to do everything with, by post, or you have to go in and do it over the desk, rather than modernizing and doing it all online. Like if that's just in the planning system, can you imagine then when it comes to construction, you'd have all these guys saying, no, this is how it's done. The guy with the wheelbarrow, he gets paid this much, and the guy that does the slabbing, he gets paid this much. And I can just imagine the amount of inefficiency that would be built into that. And I think that's probably the reason why, no matter how much the housing sort of crisis is there, I can imagine that the inefficiencies would just be so huge that it would be just a joke. And I can imagine that's why it was done away with back in the day. Why do you have to sell it? Can you not just hold on to it? I don't know. I'm picking up somebody else's conversation going on there. Anyway. A lot of people, they're forced to sell because they can't make payments and stuff like that. How long should I have a fixed rate for? ECB will reduce rates. Yeah. So listen, this is something that is really, it's a very nuanced thing, right? So when you're looking at, should you fix or should you go, floating? In terms of floating, it's like, should you leave your rate as variable? It's always a really difficult one, because the banks are looking ahead and they're looking at the likely direction. And so what they'll do is they will incentivize people to fix now while the rates are falling, so that the bank will be paying less, but people will have fixed at the higher level. So that's what the banks want you to do. They want you to fix now because the rates are falling. So you'll be fixed at the higher level, and it's all profit for them. Now, but then that when the cycle is down and when it looks like it's going to start rising, then what the banks will do is they'll incentivize you to go variable, because they don't want you to fix at the low rate and then they're going to be paying the higher rate. And so it's always working against you. Whatever you should be doing, the bank are trying to get you not to do that. And so that is something. Now, I'll give you an example. I remember I had a property that was producing quite a nice profit. And I can remember I had to pay so much every quarter in rent. And I was kind of thinking to myself, okay, and the rent was coming in, and I was getting much more rent than I was paying out in interest. And so I was thinking to myself, this is great. I've got a nice profit here. I can dip in and I can kind of keep myself going on that profit. But then the rates started to change. And I can remember every couple of months, the ECB would increase the rate. And every time it went up, the amount of interest that I had to pay went up, even though I was collecting the very same amount of rent. So the margin that I was enjoying was getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And I can remember getting to that point where I started to it dawned on me that, do you know what? In another couple of these rate changes, and I am going to be at a loss. I'm going to actually have gone from making a nice profit to being the same. And then if there's one more, I'll actually be having to feed cash into this payment. And I remember suddenly being very nervous about it and going, whoa, maybe I should fix. And by that stage, when it dawned on me that I should fix, it was already too late to fix, because the time to fix is when when I was getting the big profit. That would be the time to fix, because that's when you've got a lot of direction of travel. And so the way the banks they would give you a fixed rate, the fixed rate would always be higher than your current variable rate. So you'll have to voluntarily give up some of that profit in order to fix. But then as the rates continue to go up and up and up, then you're locked in at a lower rate as the rates continue to go. But it means that when you make the decision, you have to voluntarily give up that profit. And so that's the problem. And it works both ways. When the market is going down, it's the other way around. It will be more costly for you to be variable than it will be to fix. And so the banks are incentivizing you to go and fix, even though it's not in your interest to do that. So they always make the decision difficult. And that's how they incentivize you to do what they want rather than what is in your best interests. Now, speaking to that lady on my podcast this morning, she was saying that Avant, A-V-A-N-T, they are a company that do fixing of mortgages. And I believe that they can do quite a long fix. Like you could get 10 years fixed and stuff like that. But the time to fix for 10 years is when rates are at their absolute lowest. Like you don't want to be locking in now because rates are going to continue to fall. Anyway, let me continue on with the questions here. I'm planning to put an offer on a house I've been renting. What tips or advice would you have? Well, the first thing I would say is that there is a new scheme now where if you are looking at a property, if you're living on a property and the person who owns it is thinking of selling it, I think the way it works now is you can go to the local authority and you can say that you would like their assistance in actually buying the property from the landlord. And I think the way it works is that the landlord gives the tenant the first choice or first option, we'll say, and he goes to the local authority. And if they support that, then the local authority will pay for the property and the tenant will end up, being supported by the local authority. The problem is, I think there's certain rules about it. And one of my clients in my mastermind, he knows all about this. And he was saying that they'll go in and they'll do an assessment, and the assessment, they'll work out various things that need to be repaired and improved and things like that. And whatever it is that they need to do, that they'll deduct that from the amount that you're going to get. So it can work out not in the landlord's favor, but very much in the tenant's favor. And so it's worth looking into that. Look it up online. And just see, because I know that certainly some of the local authorities are doing that. And so it's worth your while. I have a QS background and love investing. I want to increase my cash flow. So thought HMO management could be an opportunity. It's definitely a lot more people are looking at it. One of the issues is there's a lot more work involved in it. You're managing 7 or 8 people rather than one. But the other thing is that, and this is a risk for anyone who's thinking about HMOs, is that HMOs are not regulated in this country. And because they're not regulated, you have a situation where there is a risk of regulation being introduced and you suddenly finding that your property does not comply. Now, one of the ways that I've recommended my guys get around this is by taking the UK HMO regulations and making sure that whatever you're doing here in Ireland at least complies with the UK regulations. Because if you're complying with the UK regulations, then the likelihood is you're not a million miles from complying with the Irish regulations when they eventually come in. Back in, I think it was 1988 or 1987, when the building regulations were first introduced into Ireland, they didn't write they didn't write big document with the regulations. They took the UK regulations, they came in, took the front cover off, put an Irish harp on it, and there's your Irish regulations for building. That's how they did it. Now, over the years, then it was amended and it got changes and stuff, so it isn't the same any longer. But that is usually what happens, is that they'll bring in the UK's regulations as a kind of a first stab, and then there might be changes. Now, that's not necessarily going to be exactly the same, like room sizes. For example, if you take a house and we'll say like a 4-bedroom house, a lot of the time you'll have the master bedroom, you'll have 2 decent sized bedrooms, and then you'll have what we often refer to as the box room. And it's a small little room that isn't really great for a bedroom. It's more of a storage or a box room. That kind of room, a lot of the time, will not comply as a bedroom if you're trying to rent it. Certainly, if you were to rent it as a HMO and the regulations were brought in, I would say there's a good chance that it is not going to comply. And so you might lose that bedroom. Anyway, that's so you've obviously got to be careful about. Okay, I've read about that. Let me see. What's the next question? I've read the RTB are introducing new regulations where RTB will hold tenant deposits. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised that there's various rules they're trying to bring in. What about farmland? Well, what about it? Like farmland, there is various benefits to that. What's the name of my podcast? My podcast is Behind the Facade. FACADE, as in, something in front of you. Let me see. Thought of renting houses to companies rather than private. Now, that is actually something that we've been looking at. And rather than doing a HMO where you're renting to 8 different individuals, what some people are looking at now is that you do your, we'd say, 8-bedroom HMO, and then you go and you look for a company. And the company will be like, say, a construction firm. And that firm, maybe it's just won a project, and that project is, we'll say to work on, let's just use the example of Intel, or doing lots and lots of work out there where they're based in Leixlip. And so let's say a firm has got a job with that project and they need to hire 30 laborers from, we'll say, Eastern Europe or something, and they want to bring 30 guys in to work on this big contract. They need accommodation. They're not going to be able to hire 30 people and bring them in and say, go off and look for your accommodation yourself. They're going to come and say, we have accommodation for you. And how do they get that? Well, they'll go and they'll find like an 8-bed HMO, and they'll say, we'll take all 8 beds, take it off your hands right now. And there's 8 of the 30 rooms that they've got to find sorted straight away. So that's the kind of thing that might be. And usually when corporates are doing something like that, when it's a company, that can work quite well, because they'll also take on the bills for the property and stuff like that. So that just reduces the landlord's outgoings. And so it's a nice, profitable way to do it. Trying to figure out a way to do that is the big thing. It's good if you have some contacts. Let's keep on going. M8S. M8. Father did that company in Dublin with their apartment. Yeah, I'm catching some of these comments and I'm not sure. And they claimed not to be Airbnb. Yeah, so Airbnb, you've got to be careful with Airbnb. A lot of people thought that they would rent their property out as an Airbnb, and you get a lot of money if you do that. But now there's restrictions on doing that. And I know, because I have a property in the city centre that has, it's perfect for an Airbnb. It's like right in the touristy area where people would be renting and stuff. They would pay a load of money on the weekends for that. And so it could be a great way to do it. Problem is there's a restriction. And I think it's only 90 days of the year it can be rented out as an Airbnb. If you're going to do it as an Airbnb, you're restricted to 90 days. And so that is 90 days to, that's basically, 45 weekends, we'll say, when it's just Saturday and Sunday. And so, you have to wonder whether are you going to make enough money to do that? But that's the restriction. You can't have people coming and going all the time. Let me see. Looking at a site last night, 450 unit burned. He had planning. The towns blocked it in the High Court. I don't know. Sorry, I'm not picking up all of the comments. So I'll ask a few. Let's see the sort of 25, bought a house a year ago, mortgage is 210, house is worth 290. I can use equity for deposit on a new rental property. Yeah, a lot of people are doing that. So that's where you just refinance and you go and release some equity. Or sometimes if you just go back to the bank and say, I want to buy this other property over here, they'll let you do that. They'll actually just cross secure the property. I'd be wary of that, just because if, say, you have one property and you've got a nice big lump of equity built up in it, that's great. But if you go and buy a second property, and let's say you're not as lucky with that second property, the second property could pull down the first property as well. You lose both in the event that the banks move in on you. So you got to be careful. I tried to build 12 modulars on 6 acres. I was laughed out by the council. Yeah, they're farmland. The council just won't allow a lot of the time. And sometimes what it is it's unserviced land. First of all, what you got to look at when you're looking at doing anything, you got to look at the zoning. And if something is zoned residential, then that's fine. But if it's zoned agricultural, then you're not going to be able to build on it. You look at the zoning. If you go into the local authority website, you will see they have zoning maps, and you'll just find the area that you live, and you'll see all these different colors. And there's usually a legend running down the side, and it'll tell you exactly. And you can see certain areas are industrial, certain areas are commercial, town center they call it, certain areas are residential, certain areas are community, like they might have a school and a park and things like that. And then there will be agricultural. And you'll see half the country is agricultural, but it's there not to be built on. And what they'll do is the local authority, wherever they've zoned residential, they will make sure that in that area there's drains, there's enough electricity, there's water supply, all that stuff, so that it's a serviced area. And so when you go for planning for 50 houses or whatever, those 50 houses can immediately be connected into the system. Whereas if you're trying to build on a farm, the likelihood is you're going to have to do it on a septic tank because there will be no connection to the mains. There may not be enough power coming in order to kind of do that and stuff. So there's various problems trying to do that. I know somebody trying to do, they have a beautiful bit of land and they were trying to do a glamping site, and they were turned down, which seems ridiculous to me because glamping seems like something that would be good. But anyway, those are the rules. Surely it's better to release the equity and do a buy-to-let through a limited company rather than your own name. It depends, Amanda. The reason I say it depends is that if you go to the bank and say, I'm going to use this company, the bank will often say, well, we're going to need you to give us a personal guarantee because that company is just worth, €2, and you could basically walk away from it in the morning. And so they'll often look for that. Or if you're not willing to give them that, what they'll say is that they want more equity. So instead of putting in, say, 30% and borrowing 70, what they might insist is that you have to put up 40%, and then they'll only give you 60%. And that's their way of protecting themselves in the event that something went wrong with the property, that it would have to fall by 40% in value before they have to kind of force you to sell the property. Let's keep going. Banks won't give mortgage on modular homes as the factory could go into liquidation before delivery. Yeah, well, the thing is what you're talking about there is a mortgage is on a property with a title deed. What you're talking about is probably more like a construction loan. And and this is where you'll get run into difficulties. If you're trying to get a traditional bank to do it, then the likelihood is you'll run into trouble. But if I was trying to do something like modular homes, and the modular company is saying you got to pay us first, before we'll start working on it. If they say that, then you're stuck in that situation. But if you could go and get an investor on board, the investor might be able to put up the money for that. A bank, like a mortgage, the only time you get money from a bank for a mortgage is when there's actually a title deed there for them to use as their security. And you're just not going to get that with a modular construction. But that's more development finance, I would have thought. Don't go to banks for funding. Go to property funders. Yeah, great advice on HMO, Gavin. Can you do another podcast on it? Yeah, actually, I plan to do a second podcast. I did a couple of weeks ago. I did a HMO explanatory HMO podcast explaining how it all works and stuff. And it was actually part 1 of 2. And so there's a second one I'm going to do that'll have additional information. Gavin, what's your advice for a fellow architect trying to get into development? What role suits us? So, Colin, I'm going to tell you exactly what I did. Okay, so I was development manager. You took the words out of my mouth. So what I did was I was working as an architect, and as an architect, your value is whatever other architects are paid. That's what your value is. And so other architects will accept a fee of a certain amount, and so that's the amount that you can hope to achieve. You're not going to kind of like break out of that. What I did is I stopped calling myself an architect and I started calling myself a development manager. And what I did was I said that I will take the project all the way from thinking about buying a piece of land, working out the values. Now you have to be able to do all of that stuff. Now I had done a property degree as well. So I finished architecture, went back and I started studying at night to do a property degree. And by doing that property degree, I understood how to do valuation. I understand how to do all of that development finance and stuff. I'd learned all that stuff. And I had also learned some of the legal stuff. And so you come out then the other side, and I could value a property deal. I could do all the kind of stuff. I could also do the planning, and I could organize all of the stuff that you need as a developer. But I didn't have any money myself. So I just started to put myself forward and I can remember the first job I got when I started my own firm, I was only in my 20s. I started my own architectural firm and I earned 8,000 in the first year. And I can remember like that was actually about half of what I would have earned as a salary. And so, I mean, it was woeful, really bad. And then I got into development management, and development management, I got 60 grand for a job in a year. And I can remember thinking to myself, whoa, like it's just your value is just so much more as a development manager to what I was viewed as an architect. And so it's worth looking at that. Now, nowadays, development, it's not an easy thing. Like becoming a developer is not easy. There's a lot of, you have to juggle a lot of, like we'll say, spinning plates as an analogy. You've got all these different plates and you're trying to spin all the different ones, and you're trying to buy sites, you're trying to find sites, you're trying to finance sites, you're trying to entertain investors to kind of get them to kind of back your projects. You're trying to do all of this stuff, and it's there's a lot of moving parts and stuff like that. And then you're also managing the project. And nowadays, you've got all of these external suppliers that you got to kind of bring in. So you're working with contractors, you're working with Irish Water, you're working with the electricity guys. Those guys, if you don't submit the application on time, those guys won't arrive. So you can end up building a house, having it completely finished and ready to be moved into, but you don't have electricity connected, so you can't get the certificate of the certificate basically that you need in order to sell it. And so the property is sitting there and everyone's moved on, and you just still can't sell the property because you don't have the power connected yet, Is it not a bed sit? Well, you see, bed sits, it's something similar to a bed sit, but bed sits were done away with. And so, you know what? It's funny that you say that. I can remember bed sits. One of the reasons that bed sits were disallowed was because they were not deemed to be sufficient the way they were designed and stuff like that. So it's a good question. There is a slight difference for sure, but I can remember people talking about bed sits before, and that was one of the problems with the Irish housing crisis, is that they did away with bed sits. Bed sits were a great way for people who just needed basic accommodation to get sorted out. Hi, Gavin, 25, bought my first property, left. Oh yeah, sorry, I've read that comment already. As I want to retire younger, what would I recommend? The sooner you get started, the better, because property can be a slow process. Like, the old analogy they say is that it's a sprint. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And if you've got to get patient, a lot of people they want instant gratification. They want to make money as fast as possible. And so they're expecting kind of overnight results and stuff. And that is one of the things that attracts people into the likes of, let's say, crypto. You know somebody that does crypto and they just made 50 grand in a really short space of time. You're like, whoa, I should do it as well. The reality is you could lose every penny of your money, or you could get lucky. But that's not an investment strategy. That's just getting lucky or getting unlucky. So be careful of that. With property, if you understand the way it works in terms of valuation, if you understand how to work out the yield, and then if you can just look at a place and say to yourself, you know what, I am going to, and I see Amanda says it takes 10 years to build equity. Well, that is if you're using just the market to build your equity. But what you can do is you can buy a property that is in, we'll say, shabby condition, and you can buy it at a better rate than you would if it was in perfect condition, and then you can do it up. And that's what I'm seeing guys doing. Buy a property for 200 grand, spend another 100 grand on it, so you've spent 300, but you've added maybe 100 additional thousand, so the value of the property is now 400. That's how you accelerate your equity or your appreciation of the property. Not always easy to find those properties. You have to go and look a lot. You have to, well, it's not below market. Like, buying below market obviously is the way to do it. But if you find a property that's in really poor condition, you're not buying it below market value. You're buying it at the value that the market perceives a shitty, derelict kind of building to be valued at. But sometimes the work that's required to make it nice again is not as much. And so there can be a bit of a mismatch there in pricing. And so what happens is people will end up buying that property. Usually it'll be somebody with a bit of a trade or construction background, buy the property, and not long after that, they've done it up in a nice way. They brought in a kitchen, upgraded the bathrooms, they did stuff. Maybe they brought their friends in to do some of the plumbing and electrical work, and suddenly you find that they have added a load of value that they haven't had to pay. And another thing is, I know somebody was saying this the other day. They bought, they're not VAT registered, but they have a friend who's VAT registered. And so whenever they were buying like bathrooms and all that kind of stuff, they got their friend who had the building company to buy it for them, and they would just give it to them without the VAT. They would claim back the VAT, and so the person is getting something with a 23% discount. So little things like that can mean that you're being kind of smart about it, and you're figuring it out and how to get the maximum value. Let's keep on going. Questions. Explain why the Irish market would crash. I'm not so sure it's going to crash, but if I was to explain some of the things, what causes a crash is demand and supply are mismatched. So if you look at property at the moment, there's like not enough supply. We're building about 34,000 units a year, and what we need to be building is in the region of 80,000 houses a year. And so if we're not building 80,000, then there's a shortfall every single year. And so this shortfall has been going for years now. And the estimate at the moment from Davy Stockbrokers last week was that there's 212,000 units short in the country. So we would have to build 200,000 units just to sort of match where we currently are in terms of demand. And only when we got beyond that would we actually have an oversupply. And if you have an oversupply, then prices start to fall. But at the moment, we're at a point where we're building 30, we need to be building 80. We're not going to get to 80 anytime soon. Like, I don't think we did build 80 once upon a time, but at the moment, we're just not able to get to that level. And in order to even do that, you'd need to bring so many additional laborers into the country. Like, where would they stay? There's just not enough accommodation for them at the moment. And so we're in this kind of perfect storm where we need to build 80,000 a year, and we're not able to come anywhere even near that. We're at about, we say, a quarter of that. And so that is the reason that prices will just continue to go up. Now, the only other thing that could cause a problem is affordability. And you saw what's happened in the last couple of years. Inflation reared its ugly head. And so the ECB increased interest rates to combat inflation. And when you do that, that's when suddenly everyone's mortgage payments went up. And when your mortgage payments go up, that means that your ability to fund a property of a certain price goes down. And so now all of a sudden, instead of paying 400,000 for your property and making payments, you're only able to afford 320,000 for the exact same payments, we'll say. And so now all of a sudden, all those houses that were at the 400 level that you liked the idea of buying are now, you're actually having to look around at the 320. And so suddenly you're not in that price range anymore. You're at 320. And the people were at that were at 320 are now at a lower rate again. So that pushes down the amount of ability for people to pay. And because of that, you get into this situation. where prices could drop back a bit. Now, 2008, what caused the 2008 crash? That was a global financial crisis, first of all. And all of the banks are funded by other banks. And so there's that issue. When you get into the global financial crisis, it was just this domino effect. So Lehman Brothers went out of business. Everyone thought they were going to be propped up. And when they weren't propped up, what happened was there was this domino effect. And they went bankrupt owing billions, like hundreds of billions. And when they went wallop, all of the people that they owed money to suddenly saw themselves in difficulty as well. And so it was this domino impact. And suddenly they were looking at this, what they called a systemic collapse, where everybody was now so worried that they were talking about like the ATMs weren't even going to be giving you cash anymore, because there would be no cash going into them. So it was an absolute chaos going on in order to rectify that. And the Irish banks got caught up in that, and suddenly they weren't lending. And so I was building houses and properties and buying and selling and doing all sorts of stuff. And then suddenly that's it, like that. The money dried up overnight. Suddenly you've got a hole in the ground that you were building houses. They won't even let you finish the project. So you're halfway into it, and suddenly you're just, that's it, like no more money. And it says, so I'm not going to be able to develop the site, and therefore I can't sell the site. And so you end up with a hole in the ground. So it's just a complete disaster. What about to get a second property, total value of $1 million and a yield of 100K? Should I set up a company? If I were you, when you're talking about those kind of numbers, it's probably worth your while to go and get some tax advice, because you can find that there's all sorts of little things, ways to save yourself some money there. And a couple of, I think probably 2 months back or something like that, I had on my podcast a guy called Brendan Allen. And Brendan is a tax advisor specializing in property investment and stuff. And look him up on Google there, and you'll find him. But he's a good guy. Like, he mentioned a number of tax saving advantages that, various structures you can implement and stuff. So it'd be worth talking to that person. Like, companies are great for a certain strategy, but it won't suit everybody. You do something in a company, and then you have to distribute any surplus. If you don't distribute the surplus, you have to pay extra tax on that. So people think that tax in an Irish company is 12.5%. It's not. It's 12.5% on a trading company. So if you are providing, we'll say, architectural services and charging a fee, you only pay 12.5%. But if you buy property with a company, the tax rate is 25%. And any surplus above that you save, if you don't distribute that to yourself as a dividend or as a salary or something like that, if that's not distributed within 18 months, then you have to pay an additional 12.5%. So it's like 37% tax as opposed to the 12.5%. So it's worth thinking about that. Guys, we're going to be winding up soon. So if you have any questions, drop them in there and I'll start finishing up. 2008 was a pyramid scheme. Yeah, certainly was. The bottom line anyway is that house prices in Ireland, or property prices in Ireland, fell by anywhere between 50 and 70% in 2008, 9 and 10 and stuff. One of the problems is you couldn't get any money. So if you're not able to raise money, then how would you be able to buy a property? And so people were putting property for sale and there was no bidders, not a single bidder. And I can remember I had a beautiful home, and I put it on the market for sale, and I put it at the price that it was worth before all the crash came along. No bidders. So you drop your price and you're waiting for somebody to bid at the lower price, and then no bidders. And you're like, oh, I kind of have to sell. Drop it again. If no one's bidding, it doesn't actually matter what the price is. It's just they're not able to raise the money. And so that was one of the big, big issues that we had. And I can remember kept on having to go down and down and down on the price, and eventually found somebody who had cash to buy the property. They didn't need a mortgage or anything like that. And that was painful. Anyway, there you go, guys. Okay, should I sell buy-to-let apartment or rent it? Prices are good at the moment. So it's funny you say that, because there's one of my clients has face exactly this problem. He bought an apartment and he was doing buy to let. And the problem that you have if you're trying to build, say, a portfolio or something like that, you buy the property. If it's an apartment, there's not a lot that you can do to add value to an apartment. Like, first of all, the corridor outside your door is not yours. It belongs to the building. So you can't do the corridor up. The stairs up to your floor, the lift or whatever, that's not yours. You can't do that up. So the condition of the building affects what you can achieve from your apartment. Inside the door of your apartment, you can do it up. But then again, you're also restricted because you've got people to the left of you, to the right of you, below you, and above you. So you can't really extend the property in any way. All you can do is decorative improvements. So maybe you do your kitchen up, maybe you retile your bathrooms, put in new carpets, do stuff like that. That's the limit of what you can do to improve the apartment. Whereas if you buy a house, you can do up your driveway, you can change your front door, you can put in double glazed windows, you can go and completely refurbish the place, you can extend out into the rear garden, you can go up into the attic space. Like, there's a lot more opportunity to add value. And so if you're thinking about building a portfolio, probably the better thing to do might be just to sell the apartment. And then if you have surplus then left over, maybe look for a house to go and get in and then do that work on the house. That's what one of my clients is doing. Or he's actually just sold the apartment and he has cash now, and now he's waiting to buy something. And that's where he's at now. Trying to find something, that's the next challenge, because obviously there's so much stuff. Hello, greetings from Chile. Whoa, that's cool. Nice to see you. Welcome. And do you think the house prices will drop after they finish building the new houses? They are never going to catch up. That's the problem. So we're talking about house prices and whether or not, like, you're at 200,000, like there's a shortage at the moment of 200,000 houses, and we're building 30,000 a year. So it's going to take us 7 years to get to the level that we're currently short. But if it takes 7 years to get there, are you assuming that the demand is static and that it hasn't gone up? Like, if it's 200 this year, then probably next year it's 220, and the year after that it's 240, and then the year after it's 260 or whatever, and we're only building 30. So that we're only making small chips away at the overall figure. So I don't see there being a point when we've built more houses than we need. Unless there's a sudden drain of the population and suddenly everyone decides to move to another country. It seems unlikely, because we have gone from, like, when I was a kid, I can remember the population of Ireland was like 3.95 million or something like that. Today we're over 5, and we're heading for, they say we're going to be 7 million on this island by 2057. So think about that, 7 million people. Like, that's all that extra housing is going to be needed, and we're only building 30,000 a year. So we're never going to hit that number. And for that reason, I think we're going to have a housing crisis for at least the next generation. So you guys that are in your 20s, you're going to be in your 40s going into your 50s, and this will still be a problem. Certainly, that is the view that I have. So guys, I hope you had a good interview. I hope you found this useful. Interview, I was going to say. I'm used to doing my podcast, and I've got all this language kind of programmed. So guys, I hope you've enjoyed. If you want to go and watch this, if you're only catching the end of it now, full thing is in my YouTube channel, Gavin J. Gallagher, and you'll find it all there. Plus, the last couple of weeks, I've been doing this every single week. So 7:30 p.m. every week, I go live and I do this. So look forward to seeing you in the next one. Have a good one, guys, and I'll talk to you soon.